The bonding auction smelled like desperation in expensive cologne, and I was absolutely 100% going to throw up on someone's shoes before the night was over. I stood at the back of the holding room with 17 other unbonded omegas, all of us dressed in varying shades of humiliation. The venue coordinators had called it a presentation wardrobe selection. What they actually meant was here, wear this thin white linen robe and stand very still while strangers decide if you are worth their time. I had adjusted the collar of mine 4 times already. It kept slipping off my left shoulder like it too wanted to escape. The holding room was on the 3rd floor of the Haenyeo Grand Hall in Busan, a building so aggressively beautiful it felt like an insult. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor. On the sea glittered under October moonlight like it had no idea what was happening inside this room, which honestly seemed unfair. At least the sea got to leave. My name is Seo Jiwon. I am 23 years old. I have a biochemistry degree I cannot use because no research firm in Busan will hire an unbonded omega without pack backing. I have a scar along my right palm that I keep covered with a black compression glove at all times. And I have a secret that would empty this room faster than a fire alarm if anyone found out. The glove was the important part tonight. I pressed my right hand against my thigh and breathed through my nose. Around me, the other omegas were doing what omegas at bonding auctions always did, adjusting hair, practicing smiles, whispering encouragement to each other in that brittle way that meant nobody actually felt encouraged. The boy next to me, soft-faced and nervous, kept touching the back of his neck where a bond mark would eventually go. I did not touch my neck. I had very firm opinions about that. Number 12, a coordinator called from the doorway, consulting her tablet without looking up. That's you, Seo Jiwon. You're in the next presentation group. 12, of course I was 12. Not a great number, not a terrible one. Right in the forgettable middle, which was exactly where I had planned to be tonight. My uncle, who had paid my registration fee with the kind of pointed generosity that came attached to expectations, had made it very clear what was at stake. Bond tonight or lose the apartment. Simple as that. When he was tired of supporting an Omega nephew who kept refusing perfectly acceptable alphas for reasons he called unreasonable, and I called survival instincts. I followed the coordinator down a hallway that smelled of fresh flowers and old money. Through the walls, I could hear the low murmur of the main hall below, the shuffle of hundreds of feet, the clinking of glasses. The bonding auction of Busan was a formal affair, the kind of event that had been written about in society columns for 60 years. The kind of event where powerful alpha families sent their sons, their business partners, their pack heirs, looking for omegas who would strengthen alliances and produce beautiful children and never ever cause problems. I was, historically, a problem. Not because I wanted to be, I want to be clear about that. I was not difficult out of some romantic notion of rebellion. I was difficult because I could not shake hands with a person without knowing exactly what they had done and what they were capable of doing. Every memory their skin had ever pressed into an object, every truth their hands had ever touched, came flooding into me the moment bare skin met bare skin. That was my power, psychometry, the ability to read the history of objects and people through physical contact. It sounds useful. It was, in fact, a disaster. The last alpha who had tried to court me formally, 8 months ago, had taken my ungloved hand at a dinner introduction, and I had immediately seen him standing over a terrified junior employee, screaming, face red, a shattered coffee mug at his feet. I had pulled my hand back. We said something that may or may not have been socially acceptable and left the restaurant before the appetizers arrived. My uncle had not spoken to me for 3 weeks. The coordinator stopped before a set of double doors. Behind them, the noise of the main hall surged, then quieted as if the crowd sensed something was about to happen. Group 3, she said, checking her tablet. 6 omegas. You'll walk to your assigned position on the presentation floor, stand facing the audience, and wait. No speaking unless addressed, no touching, no leaving your position without escort. No touching. That one I could manage. She pushed the doors open, and the hall swallowed us whole. It was larger than I expected. Chandeliers hung from a ceiling that seemed to go on forever, it casting everything in warm amber light that was clearly designed to make people look softer, more appealing, more like a good investment. Round tables filled the floor, each occupied by alpha families in formal dress. At the front of the hall, a raised presentation platform stretched across the width of the room, and that was where we were walking right now. All six of us, in a line that I was fairly certain was meant to look graceful and currently looked like six people individually regretting their life choices. I found my position, third from the left. I stood up straight, kept my gloved right hand at my side, and looked out at the audience with the specific expression I had practiced in my bathroom mirror for 2 days. Calm, composed, mildly bored. The expression of a person who was here by choice and could leave at any time. And nobody was looking at me. This was fine. Expected, actually. To my right stood an Omega who looked like he had been carved out of something expensive. To my left, one who had the kind of effortless composure that suggested his family had been preparing him for this room his whole life. I, in my slightly too large robe with a shoulder that would not cooperate, was precisely the type of person that eyes slid past without registering. I was good at being overlooked. I had spent years getting good at it. Being overlooked meant no introductions, no handshakes, no accidental contact, no visions flooding in uninvited. Being overlooked was protection. The auctioneer took the stage and began his introduction, and I let my attention drift just slightly, cataloging exits the way I always did in new spaces, the double doors we had entered through, a side corridor to the east, a fire exit behind the stage that a coordinator was currently blocking with her whole body like she expected someone to use it. She was not wrong to worry, and then something changed. It was not a sound. It was not a movement. It was a shift in the air, a pressure change, like the moment before lightning decides where it wants to land. Every single person in the hall felt it. I watched heads turn toward the main entrance, one after another, a slow wave of attention pulled by something I could not yet see. Then I felt it too, a weight in the air so thick it pressed against my chest like a hand. Pack energy, multiple alphas moving together, their combined dominance rolling through the room ahead of them like a warning. The main doors opened. 5 men walked in, and the hall went very, very quiet. When they were not identical, they were not even similar except in the way that all truly dangerous things share a certain quality, a sense that the world around them is slightly less real, slightly less solid, like they were the original and everything else was a copy. The one at the front was tall, jaw sharp enough to cut glass, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than my uncle's car. He moved like he owned the floor beneath his feet and was simply allowing others to stand on it out of generosity. Behind him, 4 others fanned out in a loose formation, not following exactly, not quite beside him either. A pack, but not a simple one. The tension between them was visible if you knew how to look. The slight space between shoulders that were normally pressed together, the way one of them scanned the room before the leader did. Truno, the micro-expression of the one on the far left that lasted half a second before his face went blank again. Something was happening between these 5 men that had nothing to do with this auction. The auctioneer recovered first. "The Quan pack," he announced, and the name moved through the crowd like a stone through still water. Rings of recognition, then whispers, then a hush that meant the name carried weight. I did not know the name. I made a note of that and filed it away. What I did know was that all 5 of them were now on the presentation floor. The auctioneer had skipped approximately 4 steps of formal procedure to accommodate them, and nobody in the room seemed to think this was strange except me. The pack moved along the platform the way the coordinator had told us not to, without escort, without being addressed first, and without asking. The tall one in front passed the first Omega, glanced, kept walking. The second, the third, the one who looked expensive. He slowed, his head tilted slightly. Then he kept walking. My heart did something irregular in my chest. They were coming down the line. 3 more positions and they would reach me, and there was a very strong possibility that I was about to become the person everyone looked at for all the wrong reasons. I straightened my shoulder. The robe slipped. I straightened it again. The tall alpha stopped in front of me. He was closer than the presentation rules allowed. I could smell him, pine resin and cold stone, clean and sharp and deeply, aggressively alpha, in a way that my omega biology registered with absolutely no subtlety whatsoever. My pulse jumped. I told my pulse to get a grip. He looked at me. Not at the space beside me, not past me, at me specifically, with dark eyes that gave away nothing at all. Then he looked back at his pack. Something passed between them, a glance, a silence, a question asked and answered in the language people develop after years of existing in close proximity. He turned back to me. Him, he said. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it carry further than a shout would have. We'll take him. The hall erupted, and I stood there on that platform in my robe with the uncooperative shoulder, looking up at 5 alphas who had just casually claimed me in front of 300 witnesses, and I thought with absolute clarity, there is no version of this that ends well for any of us. I was right. I just did not know yet how spectacularly right I was going to be. The noise in the hall hit me like a wall. Can 300 people talking at once, chairs scraping, glasses clinking against tables as people leaned toward each other, with their opinions already fully formed and loudly available. I caught fragments from the nearest tables. The Quan pack? All 5 of them? For that one? The one with the glove? Yes, the one with the glove. That would be me. I stood exactly where I was because moving felt like it required a decision, and I was currently using all available brain function to process the fact that 5 alphas had just publicly claimed me at the most watched bonding auction in Busan, in front of everyone, without asking, without negotiating, without doing any of the 17 formal steps the coordinator had described in the orientation packet that I had actually read cover to cover, because I was that kind of person. The tall alpha was still looking at me. Up close, he was even more unreasonably put together. Dark hair, strong jaw, the kind of bone structure that suggested his ancestors had made a deal with someone. His eyes were the color of deep water, and they had not moved off my face since he spoke. I cleared my throat. Just to confirm, I said, keeping my voice very calm and pleasant, you did just claim a complete stranger at a public auction without so much as a hello, correct? Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise. More like the look a person gets when a houseplant addresses them directly. Yes, he said. Fantastic, I said. Good to know we're all operating at that level tonight. One of the alphas behind him made a sound. It might have been a laugh that got caught halfway out and redirected into a cough. I glanced past the tall one to get a better look at the other 4, because if I was going to be claimed by a pack I had never heard of, I was at minimum going to know what I was dealing with. The one who had possibly laughed stood slightly to the left, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy posture that said he was comfortable in any room he walked into. He had a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and warm brown eyes that were currently bright with something that looked like amusement. He caught me looking and did not look away, which I noted. To the right of the tall one stood someone who was watching the crowd instead of me, his gaze moving in slow, deliberate sweeps, sharp and assessing, like a man cataloging threats as a hobby. He had high cheekbones, a jaw set in what appeared to be its resting position of mild displeasure, and the stillness of someone who moved very fast when he finally decided to move. Behind both of them, hanging slightly back, was an alpha who looked younger than the others, softer in the face though not in the build, with dark circles under his eyes that no amount of expensive grooming had fully addressed. He was watching me with an expression I could not immediately classify. Not hunger, not the cold calculation of the one doing crowd surveillance. Something quieter, closer to curiosity, but sadder. The 5th one stood at the far end of their loose formation, and this was the one that made the small hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Not from fear exactly, but from the particular instinct I had learned to trust over 23 years of touching things I should not have touched. He was leaner than the others, slightly shorter, with a face that was almost too composed, every feature arranged in an expression of pleasant neutrality that looked practiced rather than natural. He had not reacted when the tall one spoke, had not glanced at the crowd or at me. He was looking at the floor very slightly, in the way a person looks when they are thinking about something that has nothing to do with the room they are standing in. I filed all of that away. The auctioneer had recovered enough to approach, his tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. The Quan pack, he began, his voice carrying the particular strain of a man improvising against his will, Hana has expressed formal interest in Omega number 12, Seo Jiwon. Per bonding auction protocol, a formal selection requires the Omega's confirmation before proceedings can continue. He turned to me with the expression of a man who had never had to ask an Omega this particular question under these particular circumstances. Omega Seo, he said carefully, do you confirm willingness to enter preliminary bonding discussions with the Quan pack? 47 pairs of eyes swung to me, probably more. The hall had gone quiet enough that I could hear the chandelier crystals shifting in the air conditioning. I thought about my uncle. I thought about my apartment. I thought about the last 8 months of sending out applications to research firms and getting back responses that ranged from polite rejection to one memorable email that had simply said, not suitable at this time, unbonded, no pack affiliation, which I had printed out and taped to my refrigerator as motivation to feel things. I thought about 5 alphas who had walked past every other Omega in this room and stopped at me. I thought about the compression glove on my right hand and everything it was protecting all of them from knowing. Sure, I said. Why not? The auctioneer blinked. I think he had expected more ceremony. He made a note on his tablet with the energy of a man updating his resume in his head. The tall alpha, who I was now thinking of as the leader because I needed organizational systems to cope, stepped to the side and extended one arm toward the edge of the platform, indicating I should walk with them. The gesture was precise and practiced, the body language of someone accustomed to directing movement without raising his voice. I stepped off the platform. A coordinator materialized at my elbow immediately, pressing a small card into my non-gloved hand. The card had a room number on it. 3rd floor, Suite 7, private consultation room. Standard procedure, apparently, for formal selections. A private space for the Omega and the selecting pack to begin preliminary discussions under supervised conditions. I followed the coordinator. The 5 alphas followed me, or rather moved with me in the particular way of a pack. Not quite surrounding, not quite escorting, but somehow present at every angle simultaneously in a way that my Omega instincts found deeply confusing to categorize. Threat or safety? The wiring could not decide. The main hall watched us leave. I kept my spine straight and my face neutral, and did not think about the fact that every single person in that room was currently forming opinions about me that would be circulating through Busan's social network before we reached the elevator. The suite on the 3rd floor was a different world from the holding room. Warm lighting, a long couch along one wall, a low table set with water and small cups. A floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the same harbor I had stared at earlier, now glittering harder, like it was trying. The coordinator gestured us inside, confirmed a chaperone would be posted outside, and closed the door with the careful click of someone removing themselves from a situation they found professionally unprecedented. Silence. The 5 of them arranged themselves with the unconscious efficiency of people who had shared space for a long time. The leader near the window, the one with the scar and the warm eyes on the arm of the couch, crowd surveillance alpha standing near the door, the tired-eyed one taking the far chair, the composed one standing against the wall, slightly apart. I stayed near the center of the room because choosing a side felt premature, and I did not yet know which direction the problems were going to come from. The leader spoke first. I am Quan Seojin. This is my pack. He indicated each in turn. Lim Do-hyun, the one with the scar, dipped his chin, the smile still there at the edges. Shim Park Min-jae. Crowd surveillance gave a single nod. Choi Yun-ho. The tired one looked up briefly with those quiet eyes. And Han Jun-ho. The composed one did not react at all, which was itself a kind of reaction. Seo Jiwon, I said, since apparently we were doing introductions. Biochemist. Currently between employment opportunities. One previous formal courtship attempt ended badly. Not my fault. Well, debatably, not my fault. I paused. Do you want the full resume, or is that enough context? Lim Do-hyun absolutely laughed this time. It came out fully, warm and uncomplicated, and the sound of it changed the temperature of the room in a way I had not expected. Seo-jun did not laugh, but something at the corner of his mouth moved. You're nervous, Min-jae said from near the door. His voice was lower than I expected, deliberate, like each word was chosen and placed carefully. I'm always this charming, I said. Nerves have nothing to do with it. You keep touching your right hand, he said. I stopped touching my right hand. The room absorbed that small exchange. I watched Yunho trace the rim of one of the small cups without picking it up, a slow, circling motion. I watched Junho looking at nothing in particular, with an attention that felt very pointed. Seo crossed his arms. We should discuss terms. Before terms, I said, I have a question. He looked at me steadily. Go ahead. I looked at all 5 of them, one after another, taking my time because I had earned the right to take my time in this room. The hall full of people who had watched right through me, the coordinator who had handed me a number like livestock inventory, the uncle who had given me a deadline like I was an overdue bill. Why me? I asked. You walk past 14 other omegas. Some of them were objectively better presented than I was. My robe was not cooperating. You had options. I held the pause just long enough. So why did you stop at number 12? The question landed in the room and stayed there. Seo Jiwon held my gaze for a long moment. Around him, 4 alphas waited, and in that waiting I caught something, a tension that had been there since they walked in, quiet and unresolved, sitting in the spaces between them like an argument that had been postponed rather than finished. Because, Seo Jiwon said, and then stopped. He glanced just briefly, just once at Junho. Junho was still looking at nothing. Because you were the only one who looked like you did not want to be chosen, Seo Jiwon finished, and we needed someone who would not try to manage us. I stared at him. That, I said slowly, is either the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me at one of these events, or the most alarming. Both, Do-hyun offered cheerfully. I looked out at the harbor. The sea glittered. It still did not know what was happening in here. Neither fully did I. But somewhere beneath the nerves and the sarcasm and the very reasonable alarm bells going off in the back of my brain, something else had started. Small and quiet and completely unwelcome. Curiosity about 5 alphas who had their own tension, their own unfinished argument, their own reason for needing someone who would not try to manage them. About what exactly they were afraid someone might manage them into. I pressed my gloved hand against my thigh and said nothing. For now. The words sat in my chest like a held breath. Seo Jiwon had moved to the window. His back was partially toward me, arms still crossed, looking out at the harbor with the focused stillness of someone who used silence as a tool. I had met people like that before, people who understood that quiet, applied correctly, made other people fill it with things they had not planned to say. I was not going to be that person tonight. Do-hyun had fully settled onto the arm of the couch now, one ankle crossed over his knee, watching me with those warm eyes like I was the most interesting thing that had happened to him in months. Given that he was apparently part of one of Busan's most talked about packs, that said something, though I was not sure yet what. So, I said, because someone had to, terms. Seo Jiwon turned from the window. The pack is looking for a bonded omega, formally documented, presented to the pack council within 60 days of tonight. 60 days, I repeated. It is a formality, Minji said from the door. He had not moved from that position once. I was beginning to think he had chosen it deliberately, the angle that covered the exit and the room simultaneously. The documentation is what matters. The bond itself would follow after a probationary cohabitation period. How long is the probationary period? 30 days, Seo Jiwon said. I looked at him. So you want me to move in with 5 alphas I met 40 minutes ago for 30 days to see if we are compatible before a formal bond, which itself has a 60-day deadline. And this is the offer you are leading with. Yes, Seo Jiwon said. And you thought I seemed like someone who would not try to manage you? I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Interesting read. Do-hyun made the almost laugh sound again. Yunho looked up from the cup he had still not picked up, and for the first time, something moved behind his tired eyes. Not amusement exactly. Recognition, maybe. You have concern, Seo Jiwon said. I have a list, I said pleasantly. Would you like it alphabetically or by severity? Minji's jaw shifted. Not quite a smile. Not quite not one, either. Start with the most important, Seo Jiwon said. I held up my gloved right hand. I have a medical condition affecting my right hand. Nerve sensitivity, I do not remove the glove in formal or social settings. And that is non-negotiable, and it is not up for further discussion at any point, including after a bond is formed. The room absorbed this. I watched each of them process it in their own way. Doyun nodded easily, no hesitation. Minjae's eyes went to the glove and stayed there for exactly 1 second longer than casual before moving away. Yunho said nothing, which I was beginning to understand was his primary mode of communication. Junho, still against the wall, did not react at all. Sojun said, "Agreed." He said it too quickly. Not suspiciously quickly, just quickly enough that I noted it and stored it next to the glance he had given Junho earlier, and the unfinished argument energy that still lived in the spaces between all five of them. "Second concern," I said. I was in the middle of a job search before my uncle enrolled me in this event, without what I would describe as my full enthusiastic consent. I intend to continue that search regardless of cohabitation arrangements. I am not interested in being a decorative pack omega who organizes dinner schedules and attends social functions as a unit of display. "We have a home office," Doyun offered. "I want that in writing." He grinned. It was a good grin, the kind that rearranged a face completely, and I made a note that Lim Do-hyun's grin was the kind of thing a person needed advance warning about. "Third," I said, and this was the one that mattered most, the one I had to phrase carefully because the real reason underneath it was not something I could explain in this room to these strangers on this particular night. "A physical contact will be gradual. On my timeline. I do not care what pack bonding customs say about scent marking or proximity schedules. We move at a pace I am comfortable with, or we do not move at all." Silence. This one landed differently. I watched Seojun's expression do something complicated, watched Minjae's eyes sharpen, watched Do-hyun's grin settle into something quieter and more attentive. It was Yunho who spoke. His voice was low and a little rough, like someone who did not use it often enough to keep it smooth. "That is reasonable," he said simply. Everyone looked at him slightly, the way people look when a quiet person unexpectedly weighs in. He did not seem to notice or care. Seojun nodded once. "Agreed." I studied him. "Hoi, you are very agreeable for someone who led with a 60-day deadline." "The deadline is external," he said. Something shifted in his face when he said it, a tightening around the jaw, brief and controlled. "The terms between us are ours to set." External. I filed that word carefully. External meant someone else was involved, a family obligation, a pack council expectation, a contract that existed before tonight, before me, which meant I was not the beginning of the story. I was being inserted into a middle that had already been running for some time. I looked at Junho against the wall. He was still doing that thing where he looked at nothing with too much focus. Whatever the unfinished argument was, whatever the external deadline was connected to, I had a strong and entirely unverified suspicion that it involved the quietest person in the room. I was not going to ask tonight. I had exactly the right amount of information for one evening, and several alarming things to think about privately. "All right," I said. "I have one more question, and then I am going home to sleep on all of this before anyone signs anything." "Ask," Seojun said. I looked at him steadily. "What are you five not telling me?" The room went very, very still. Doyun's grin was completely gone. Minjae had gone flat-faced in the way of someone who had trained themselves not to react. Yunho set down the cup he had finally picked up. Junho's gaze moved just slightly from nothing to the floor directly in front of his feet. Seojun looked at me for a long moment with those deep water eyes. Nothing that will hurt you," he said. "That," I said quietly, "is not the same as nothing." He held my gaze and did not argue the point, which told me everything and nothing all at once. And somehow that was worse than a lie would have been. I left the suite at exactly 10:47 p.m. I know the time because I checked my phone in the elevator on the way down, partly to confirm the hour, and partly to have something to look at that was not five alphas with complicated silences and a secret they had collectively decided was not going to hurt me. People who said things were not going to hurt you were, in my experience, the people most likely to accidentally hurt you while genuinely believing they would not. It was not malice. When it was the particular blindness of people who had not yet understood that their version of fine and your version of fine were built from entirely different materials. The elevator opened into the lobby. I walked through it with my spine straight and my gloved hand in my jacket pocket and my face doing the expression I had practiced. Calm, composed, mildly bored. A woman near the coat check looked up as I passed. Her eyes went to my face, then to the consultation suite elevator, then back to my face with the particular calculation of someone connecting dots. I smiled at her pleasantly and kept walking. Outside, Busan breathed cool October air across the harbor promenade. I stopped on the steps and let it hit me. The salt and the cold and the distant sound of water moving against the dock pilings. White and I exhaled for what felt like the first time since I had walked onto that presentation platform. My phone buzzed. My uncle. I stared at his name on the screen for 3 full seconds, then answered. "Well," he said before I could speak, "good evening to you too. Jiwon." His voice carried the specific tone of a man who had spent money and wanted results. The auction coordinator sent an update to registered family contacts. It says you entered a private consultation with a selecting pack. Accurate, I said. Which pack? I watched a couple walk past along the promenade, close together, the Omega leaning slightly into the Alpha's side with the unconscious ease of people who had been bonded long enough that proximity was just breathing. The Quan pack, I said. Silence on the line. Then in a completely different voice, Quan Seo Jiwon's pack? You know him? Everyone in Busan knows the Quan pack. My uncle's tone had shifted from pressuring to something that sounded almost cautious, which was new. He was not a cautious man. Jiwon, those 5 have been the center of very serious talk this past year. There are things about that pack that you should know before you agree to anything. I stood very still on the steps. The harbor moved behind me. What kind of things? A pause, long enough to mean the things were not small. Come home first. We will talk properly. Tell me now. Jiwon. Uncle. I kept my voice even. You put me in that auction hall tonight with a deadline and a registration number. The least you can do is tell me what you know about the pack that just claimed me in front of 300 people. Another pause, and then a slow exhale that I could hear through the phone. There was an incident, he said carefully, 8 months ago, involving the pack and a bond contract with another Omega. It ended badly. The details were kept out of the press, but people talk. He stopped. Just come home, please. The line went quiet between us in the particular way of conversations that had more underneath them than either person was saying out loud. I will be home in an hour, I said, and hung up. I stood on the steps for another moment. 8 months ago, a bond contract, another Omega. It ended badly. Behind me, the Henyo Grand Hall hummed with the rest of the auction still running, other Omegas still standing on that platform in their cooperative and uncooperative robes, other packs making their calculations. Out on the harbor, a ferry moved slowly across the black water, its lights reflecting in long broken lines below the surface. I thought about Seo Jiwon's face when he said the deadline was external. I thought about Junho standing apart from the rest of them, too still, too composed, watching nothing with too much attention. I thought about the way Minjae's eyes had moved to my glove and held there for 1 second too long. I thought about what Seo Jiwon had said when I asked why they chose me. Because you were the only one who looked like you did not want to be chosen. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked toward the taxi stand. The drive home took 20 minutes through the lit streets of Busan. I watched the city move past the window, the bright storefronts of Seomyeon giving way to the quieter residential streets of my neighborhood. I rank the familiar convenience store on the corner, with the flickering sign that the owner had been meaning to fix for 2 years. Normal things. Anchoring things. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades, but had good water pressure, and a window that faced east, which I valued more than aesthetics. I let myself in, dropped my jacket on the chair by the door, and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the dark before I remembered to turn the light on. I removed my right glove slowly. The scar along my palm caught the kitchen light, pale and slightly raised, running from the base of my index finger to the heel of my hand. I had gotten it at 19, the first time my psychometry had surged completely out of my control. a ceramic mug left on a library table by a stranger. I had picked it up without thinking and been dropped into 6 months of that stranger's memories all at once. Joy and grief in a childhood bedroom, and a funeral and a first kiss, all of it crashing through me simultaneously while I stood in the middle of the library, unable to move or speak for 4 full minutes. I had broken the mug when I finally came back to myself. The shard had caught my palm on the way down. The scar was the reminder I had decided to keep instead of getting fully treated, a physical boundary between me and forgetfulness about what I was. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen counter. The counter gave me nothing, which was the point of my own home. I had been careful about what I allowed to accumulate memory here. Nothing with too much history. Nothing that had passed through too many hands before mine. My phone buzzed again. Not my uncle this time. An unknown number, which was unusual enough that I opened the message. It was from Do-yoon. I did not know how he had gotten my number, and I was filing that question directly into the concerning pile. The message said, "You forgot to get our address for the 30-day consideration." I stared at the screen. Then, because he had sent a second message immediately after, I read that one too. Also, for what it's worth, Seo Jiwon doesn't say things like, "It won't hurt you lightly." He means it every time. He's just not always right. I read that second message 3 times. He means it every time. He's just not always right. That was either the most comforting or most alarming thing anyone had texted me at 11 p.m. on the night I had been claimed at a bonding auction. I genuinely could not decide which. Which I typed back, "How did you get this number?" His response came in 4 seconds. "Minjae." I looked at the ceiling of my kitchen, then back at the phone, then at my scarred palm still flat on the counter. Minjae had gotten my number from the auction registry, which was technically accessible to selecting packs during the consultation period, which meant this was legal, which did not make it feel less like a very smooth opening move from a man who had stood by a door, cataloging threats all evening. I typed, "Tell Minjae I noted it." Do-hyun. He says noted back. I put the phone face down on the counter. I stood in my quiet kitchen in my apartment that contained no objects with too much history, and I thought about 5 alphas and an 8-month-old incident and a deadline that came from somewhere outside the pack itself. When I thought about Chun-ho's careful blankness and Yoon-ho's quiet voice saying that is reasonable, like he had been waiting for someone to say something reasonable for a long time. I thought about Seo Jiwon looking at me and not arguing when I said that is not the same as nothing. My psychometry had never lied to me, not once in 23 years. Objects held truth the way water held cold, completely and without negotiation. But I had not touched any of them, not one. And I was already unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with my power and everything to do with something I did not have a clean name for yet. I picked up the phone and typed to Do-hyun, "Send me the address." Then I went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a very long time before I slept. Morning arrived the way it always did in my apartment, through the east-facing window, directly onto my face with zero regard for how little I had slept or how many complicated thoughts I had accumulated since the previous evening. I lay there for a moment with the light pressing against my closed eyelids and listened to the sounds of my neighborhood waking up, the convenience store owner rolling up his shutter, a delivery bike on the street below, someone 3 floors up dropping something heavy and then saying nothing about it. Normal sounds, grounding sounds. I sat up and reached for my phone before I was fully conscious, which was how I discovered that Do-hyun had sent the address at 11:43 p.m., followed by a second message at 11:44 that said, "Breakfast is at 8 if you want to come see the place before you decide anything. No pressure, there will be eggs." And I stared at that message for a long moment. "No pressure," he said. "There will be eggs," he said, as if the eggs were a reasonable incentive, as if I was the kind of person who could be lured into a life-altering decision with the promise of a hot breakfast. I checked the time. 7:22 a.m. I got up and brushed my teeth. The address Do-hyun had sent was in Hyundai, which told me something about the pack's financial situation that I had already suspected from Seo Jiwon's suit and the way they had walked into the Hanyu Grand Hall, like the room had been arranged for their benefit. Hyundai was Busan's most expensive coastal district, the kind of neighborhood where the buildings had names and the parking was underground and the convenience stores somehow felt more curated than the ones in my area. Somehow, I took the subway because I was not going to arrive at a pack house in a taxi and imply I was already comfortable enough to expense the trip to them. The subway took 40 minutes. I stood the whole way holding the overhead rail with my left hand, watching the stations pass, thinking about my uncle's voice on the phone last night. 8 months ago. A bond contract. Another Omega. It ended badly. I had not called him back. I had decided somewhere between staring at the ceiling and falling asleep at approximately 2 a.m. that I wanted to see the pack house and the people in it before I heard someone else's account of who they were. My psychometry had taught me that objects told the truth, but people told their version of it. And my uncle's version was already going to be filtered through his particular way of seeing the world, which prioritized social standing and pack reputation and did not always leave room for context. I wanted context. The pack house was a 6-story residential building set back from the coastal road, close enough to the water that I could smell the sea from the front entrance. It was modern and clean-lined, the kind of architecture that was confident rather than showy. A security panel beside the front door had a unit number beside a name that just said Quan, no first name, which I found either efficient or ominous depending on the angle. I pressed the intercom. "You came." Do-Yoon's voice, warm and immediately recognizable even through the speaker static. "You mentioned eggs," I said. The door buzzed open. The interior was nicer than I had prepared myself for. Not in a cold, staged way, but in the way of a space that had been lived in long enough to develop personality. Shoes lined up near the entrance in a slightly imperfect row that suggested someone had organized them and someone else had disrupted the organization, and neither party had resolved it. A jacket thrown over the banister of the stairs that was clearly not where jackets were supposed to go. On the wall beside the elevator, a framed photograph of what looked like the 5 of them at the beach, younger. Do-Hyun's arm around Yoonho's shoulders, all of them in various states of squinting against the sun. They had been together for a long time. That photograph said so clearly. Do-Hyun met me in the hallway outside the 4th floor unit, dressed in a gray sweatshirt and looking approximately 40% less intimidating than he had in the Haenyeo Grand Hall, and which I suspected was entirely intentional. He had a dish towel over his shoulder and something on his hands that was probably egg. "You actually came," he said, like he was surprised despite having invited me. "I contain multitudes," I said. "Where are the others?" "Seo Jiwon is on a call. Minjae went for a run at 5 a.m., like a person with no concept of rest. Yoonho is still asleep." He paused. "Junho is in his room." The way he said the last one was different from the others. Not quieter exactly, but more deliberate, like a word he was placing carefully. "Is Junho often in his room?" I asked. Do-Hyun looked at me for a moment. The easy warmth in his face did not disappear, but something behind it shifted, became more attentive. "Come eat first," he said, "and then we can talk." The kitchen was large and slightly chaotic in the way of kitchens that fed multiple people with different schedules. A pan on the stove, bread in the toaster, 2 mugs already on the table, and a third being added as Do-Hyun moved back around the counter. I sat at the table because standing in someone else's kitchen felt more intrusive than sitting, and looked around while he worked. The refrigerator had things on it, a delivery schedule written in handwriting that was too neat to be anything but Minji's. A photo held by a magnet, smaller than the one in the hallway, the 5 of them again but indoors this time. Someone's birthday by the look of the cake. A sticky note in handwriting I did not recognize yet that said, "Do not buy the cheap ramyun again. You know who you are." Normal things. Domestic things. The accumulated evidence of people who shared space and argued about ramyun brands and had different levels of commitment to organized shoe placement. Do-Hyun set a plate in front of me. Eggs, rice, some kimchi on the side. Simple. Good. "You want to know about 8 months ago," he said. He sat down across from me with his own plate. Direct, no preamble. I appreciated that immediately. I looked up at him. My uncle mentioned an incident, a bond contract, another Omega. Do-Hyun nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the table for a moment, before looking back up at me. "His name was Cha Min-jun. The pack entered a preliminary bond agreement with him through a private arrangement. Not an auction, a family introduction. He stopped. Amwid lasted 6 weeks before he ended it. Why? He said the pack dynamic was unstable. Do-hyun's voice stayed even, but something in it had weight. He filed a formal complaint with the pack registry citing emotional volatility and unsafe bonding conditions. I set my chopsticks down carefully. Was he right? Do-hyun met my eyes. Parts of what he said were true, he said. Parts of it were not. The parts that were not true were the ones the registry recorded. I held that sentence up and looked at it from several angles. That is a very careful way of saying something. I am a very careful person about some things. He glanced toward the hallway, toward the direction of Junho's room. The complaint was recorded as pack instability. What it actually was something much more specific to one situation, one moment. In one person, he stopped again. And the person it was about has been paying for it since. Junho. I did not say the name out loud. I did not have to. Do-hyun's eyes confirmed it before he looked back down at his plate. The complaint is why there is a deadline, I said quietly. It was not a question. The pack registry put us on a formal review status, Do-hyun said. We have 90 days from the date of the complaint's resolution to demonstrate stable bonding progress, or the pack loses its registered status entirely. He looked up. The auction was day 31. I sat with that for a moment. 60 days from last night. 31 days already gone. A clock that had been running before I ever walked into that hall. So you need an Omega on record, I said. For the registry. We need an Omega who is actually here, Do-hyun said. And the distinction in his voice was careful and firm. Not a name on a document, someone present, because the reviewer makes site visits. How many site visits? 3, unannounced. I looked at him across the table. The egg was getting cold. I did not care about the egg anymore. Do-hyun, I said, why are you telling me all of this? He looked at me steadily. Because you asked last night what they were not telling you, he said. And Seo Jiwon said it would not hurt you, and I think he meant that. But I also think you deserve to know what you are walking into before you walk into it. He paused. I did not want you to find out 3 weeks in and feel like we used you. I looked at him for a long time. At the dish towel still on his shoulder, and the egg on his hands and the photograph on the refrigerator, and the sticky note about the ramyun. You are the one they send when they need someone to actually talk, I said. He smiled, smaller than last night, more real. Someone has to be. From down the hallway, a door opened. Quiet footsteps. Then Junho appeared in the kitchen doorway in a plain white shirt and dark sweatpants. His hair slightly uneven from sleep, looking at me with those two composed eyes that were this close, in morning light, without the formal suit and the crowded room, not quite as blank as they had been last night. He looked at the plate in front of me, then at Do-hyun. You told him, Junho said. Yes, Do-hyun said. Junho looked at me then. Something moved through his face that he did not quite manage to keep still. And not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. Something that had been sitting in him long enough to leave a mark. I am sorry, he said quietly, that the situation is what it is. I looked at Han Junho in his kitchen doorway, with his uneven hair and his careful apology, and I thought about complaint forms and registry deadlines and a name on a document versus a person actually present. And I thought about Do-hyun saying, I did not want you to feel like we used you. Sit down, I said. There are eggs. Junho blinked. I am not making any decisions standing up, I said. And neither are you. Sit. He sat. And somewhere in the walls of this pack house, in the lived-in quiet of a Saturday morning in Hyundai, something shifted. Small and careful and not yet named, but present. Junho sat across from me at the kitchen table with the careful posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, and I watched him look at the plate Do-hyun slid in front of him, like he was not entirely sure he had been given permission to eat it. That was the detail that got me. Not the apology, not the uneven hair or the composed face or the thing Do-hyun had told me about the complaint. It was that. The way he looked at a plate of eggs like he needed to confirm it was actually for him. I picked up my chopsticks and ate, Because the fastest way to make someone comfortable at a table was to act like eating was the main event and everything else was secondary. After a moment, Junho picked up his chopsticks too. Wo Do-hyun watched us both over the rim of his mug with the satisfied expression of someone who had just successfully managed a situation and was too smart to say so out loud. So, I said, to no one in particular, the complaint Cha Min-jun filed, the one about pack instability. I kept my voice conversational, the way I used it when I wanted information, without making the other person feel interrogated. What actually happened? Silence. Do-hyun looked at Junho. Junho looked at his plate. You do not have to answer that, I said. I am asking because I want to understand, not because I need ammunition. Junho looked up at that. His eyes, up close and in morning light, were darker than I had registered last night. Not cold. She just guarded in the specific way of someone who had been precise about what they showed people for long enough that it had become involuntary. Minjin and I did not get along, Junho said. His voice was quiet but steady. He found me difficult. I found him dishonest. 6 weeks in, he told the pack I had threatened him. I kept my face neutral. Had you? No. No hesitation. No defensiveness. Just the flat, even delivery of someone stating a fact they had already made peace with not everyone believing. We had an argument. I told him that I knew he was reporting information about the pack's private finances to his family's investment group. He called it a threat. The registry called it emotional volatility. I looked at him. He was leaking financial information, and you confronted him about it. Yes. And the outcome was a formal complaint against you. Against the pack, Junho said. But yes, primarily against me. I set my chopsticks down and looked at the refrigerator, at the sticky note about the ramyeon, at the birthday photo with the cake, at the accumulated normal evidence of 5 people who had been together long enough to develop opinions about each other's grocery habits. Where did the financial information go? I asked. Do-hyun's mug stopped halfway to his mouth. Junho went very still. I am not asking to be nosy, I said. I am asking because if someone was leaking your pack's financial information to an outside investment group 6 weeks into a preliminary bond, the leak did not start at week 6. It started before that. Which means Cha Min-jun came into the bond arrangement with the intention of getting that information, which means someone pointed him at your pack specifically. I looked at Junho. Do you know who? The kitchen was very quiet. From the hallway, footsteps. Seo Jiwon appeared in the doorway in a dress shirt with the collar open, phone in hand, mid-conversation expression still fading from his face. He looked at me, then at Junho, then at Do-hyun. He figured it out, Do-hyun said simply. Seo Jiwon looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that I could not fully classify. Not displeasure, closer to the look of someone recalculating. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. How much did Do-hyun tell you? Enough, I said. I filled in the rest. What rest? The Cha Min-jun was planted, I said. Aaron, that whoever pointed him at your pack knew enough about your internal structure to identify Junho as the most effective pressure point. That the complaint was the goal, not the consequence. I pause. And that the 90-day registry deadline is not an accident. Someone wanted your pack on a clock. The silence that followed was a different quality from the ones before it. Heavier, more specific. Seo Jiwon looked at me with those deep water eyes. You got all of that from what Do-hyun told you. Do-hyun told me the fact, I said. Facts have shapes. You learn to see the shapes if you pay attention long enough. I picked my chopsticks back up. I am very good at paying attention. Min-jae walked in at exactly that moment, post-run, hair damp, in a gray technical jacket. Kenan stopped dead in the kitchen doorway, taking in the tableau of 4 people around a table, in a conversation that had clearly been going on without him. His eyes went to me first, then to Seo Jiwon, then to Junho. How long has he been here, he asked. Since eggs, Do-hyun said. Min-jae pulled out a chair, sat down and looked at me with those sharp, assessing eyes that had cataloged the consultation room last night with the same efficiency they were using now. What did we miss? He thinks Min-jun was planted, Seo Jiwon said. Min-jae looked at me steadily. We think that too. I know, I said. Your face last night when Seo Jiwon said the deadline was external, That was not surprise, that was confirmation. I met his gaze. You already knew. Minja was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular economy of a person who did not waste words, he said yes. I nodded. Then I looked around the table. Seo Jiwon at the head, recalculating. Do Hyun watching me with that warm, bright attention. Min Jae steady and sharp across the table. Junho sitting with his plate and his careful posture and his eyes that were less guarded than they had been 60 seconds ago. One chair empty, which I already knew was Yunho's. Here is what I want to know, I said. And I want an actual answer, not a careful one. I looked at Seo Jiwon. If I agree to the 30 days, if I move in, participate in the site visits, give your pack the documentation the registry needs, what happens to me if whoever planted Minjin decides I am the next pressure point? The table absorbed that question. Seo Jiwon leaned forward, his elbows on the table, hands clasped, the full weight of his attention settling on me in a way that was not aggressive, but was very, very present. We do not let that happen, he said. That is not an answer, I said. That is an intention. I am asking about a plan. Something shifted in his face, not irritation. The opposite of irritation, actually. The look of someone encountering a specific kind of resistance they had not anticipated and finding it, against expectations, useful. We are working on identifying the source, Minji said. We have been for 6 months. We are close. How close? Week, he said. Maybe less. I looked at him. And in the meantime, the site visits. 3 of them, Seo Jiwon confirmed. Unannounced. The reviewer needs to observe natural pack and omega dynamics, cohabitation evidence, shared meals, routine presence. Basically, I said, Inoma, I need to convincingly live here. Not convincingly, Do Hyun said, and his voice had lost the lightness it usually carried. Actually, there is a difference. Reviewers are trained to identify performance. I looked at him. Are you telling me I have to genuinely integrate into this pack in 30 days for a reviewer I cannot prepare for? Yes, he said simply. I sat back in my chair. From the hallway, slow footsteps. Yunho appeared in the doorway in an oversized cream sweater that made him look younger than last night. His dark hair pushed back from his face, eyes still carrying the soft, unfocused quality of someone not fully awake. He looked at the table, at me, at the number of people in the kitchen. He stayed, Yunho said, not surprised, just noting it. He came back, Do-hyun corrected. Yunho looked at me with those quiet eyes. Chuit, is that different? Yes, I said. He considered that for a moment, then moved to the counter and began making himself tea with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had a specific morning ritual and was not going to rush it regardless of the audience. There was something settling about it, the absolute refusal to perform urgency. I watched him and felt something I had not expected to feel in this kitchen on this morning. Safe, briefly, tentatively, without full justification. Safe. I pressed my gloved hand flat against my thigh under the table and made myself think clearly. 30 days, 3 unannounced visits, a planted informant already in the past, and an unknown source still in the present. 5 alphas with a secret they had now mostly told me, and one of them who had paid a price for someone else's dishonesty. My biochemistry degree, my east-facing window, my refrigerator with nothing on it, my uncle's apartment deadline, which was, I suddenly remembered, still real and still coming. If I do this, I said, and the kitchen went attentive in the specific way of people who had been hoping to hear those words and were now being very careful not to show it. I have conditions beyond what I listed last night. Name them, Seo Jiwon said. I keep looking for work. The home office Do-hyun mentioned, I want access to it, and I want it understood that my professional life is separate from pack dynamics. Agreed. I have my own room with a door that locks from the inside. Not because I do not trust you, I added, looking at each of them in turn, but because I need a space that is mine while everything else is uncertain. Already arranged, Seo Jiwon said. I looked at him. You set up a room before I agreed to anything? Do-hyun was optimistic, Min-jae said, with the flattest delivery I had ever heard. Do-hyun pointed at himself. I believe in preparation. I pressed my lips together against something that wanted to be a smile and was not ready to be a smile yet. Last condition, I looked at Junho. He met my gaze steadily, waiting. Whatever is still unresolved between the five of you about what happened 8 months ago, I am not a solution to it. I am not here to fix the dynamic or absorb the tension or make things feel normal again by being a neutral presence in the room. I held Junho's gaze. If there is something broken in this pack, it needs to be named. Not for me, for you. The table was very quiet. Junho looked at me for a long moment. Something behind his eyes moved, shifted. Eyes settled differently than it had been sitting before. Okay, he said, just that. No elaboration, but the way he said it, like a door opening rather than closing, was enough. I looked at Seo Jiwon. I will need to go home and pack a bag. His expression did something it had not done in any of the hours I had known him so far. It opened, just slightly. Just enough to see that underneath all that deep water stillness, Quan Seo Jiwon was relieved. I will have Minjae drive you, he said. I can take the subway. Minjae will drive you, he said again, with the calm finality of a man who expressed care through logistics and was not going to apologize for it. I looked at Minjae. He was already standing. I pushed back my chair, picked up my empty plate, and carried it to the sink because I was not the kind of person who left his dishes for other people. When I turned back, Junho was watching me from the counter with his tea, and something in his quiet face had shifted into something that might eventually become warmth. The room faces the water, he said. I asked them to put you there. I looked at him. Why? He looked into his mug. You seem like someone who needed to see something open, he said quietly, when everything else is closing in. I stood in that kitchen in that pack house in Hyundai with the sea outside the window and 5 alphas who had their own damage and their own clock and their own incomplete story. And I thought, this is either the best decision I have ever made or a disaster of genuinely impressive scale. Either way, I was already in it. Minjae drove the way he did everything else, efficiently, quietly, with the particular focus of someone who treated all tasks with equal seriousness, regardless of scale. His car was clean in a way that suggested it was always clean, not recently clean for appearances. The kind of clean that came from habit rather than effort. I sat in the passenger seat and watched Busan move past the window. The coastal road gave way to the elevated highway, the sea appearing and disappearing between buildings in bright morning flashes. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes, and it was not uncomfortable, which I noted because silence with a near stranger was usually one of 2 things: awkward or loaded. This was neither, it was just quiet. Minjae broke it first. You asked the right questions, he said, eyes on the road, no preamble. When I ask a lot of questions, I said, statistically, some of them will be right. Not those specific ones. He changed lanes with clean precision. Most people, when they find out about Minjun, focus on the complaint, the registry status, the deadline. He paused. You focused on the source. The complaint is a symptom, I said. Sources are more interesting. He was quiet for a moment. What made you think it was deliberate? I looked at the side of his face, the sharp profile, the jaw set in its permanent considering expression. Because Junho confronted Minjun about financial leaking and the outcome was a complaint against Junho specifically, I said. If Minjun had genuinely felt threatened, the complaint would have been about the confrontation, the argument, the words used. Instead, it was filed as a pack character assessment. In emotional volatility, unsafe bonding conditions. I watched his jaw shift slightly. That language is registry language, precise, clinical, exactly targeted to trigger a formal review. An Omega who felt threatened in the moment does not reach for that vocabulary. Someone who planned the outcome in advance does. Minjae was quiet for long enough that I wondered if I had miscalculated something. Then he said, Junho said that exact thing to the review board. What happened? They noted it and moved on. His voice was even, but underneath it, something ran tight and controlled. The complaint was already filed. The review was already initiated. The board's position was that regardless of Minjun's motivations, Way the pack's response to the situation demonstrated instability, because Junho confronted him directly instead of going through formal channels. Yes, I turned back to the window. We were off the highway now, moving through the familiar streets of my neighborhood. The convenience store with the flickering sign. The bakery that opened at 6 a.m. and was always sold out of the good bread by 8. Normal things. Who benefits from your pack losing registered status? I asked. Minjae's hands shifted on the wheel, just slightly. That is what we have been trying to establish for 6 months. Business competitor? Rival pack? Possibly both, he said. The pack holds 3 active development contracts in Hyundai and 1 in Centum City. Losing registered status would void 2 of them by the terms of the agreements. The contracts would go back to open tender. Worth enough to orchestrate a planted informant and a registry complaint. Worth considerably more than enough, he said. He pulled up in front of my building and put the car in park. Through the windshield, I could see the convenience store owner outside now, arranging a small display of seasonal items with the focused energy of a man who found deep satisfaction in minor organization. I understood that impulse completely. Can I ask you something? I said. You have been asking things since last night, Minjae said. I do not see why you would stop now. Last night in the consultation room, I said, you stood by the door the entire time, cataloging the room. Habit, he said. What kind of habit comes from? He looked at me then, fully for the first time since we got in the car. His eyes were sharper up close than they appeared at a distance. The kind of sharp that came from paying attention to everything for long enough that it became structural rather than conscious. The kind that comes from being responsible for people who do not always recognize when they need protecting, he said. I held that answer and turned it over. Is that why you got my number from the registry last night, before I had agreed to anything? Something in his expression shifted, not guilt, more like the look of someone who had made a calculated decision and was prepared to defend it, but had not expected to be asked directly this soon. I wanted to know if you would respond, he said. What you responded with told me more than the consultation did. I told you that I noted it, I said. Yes, he said. You did not say it was inappropriate. You did not threaten to report it. You noted it, which meant you filed it as information rather than violation. He held my gaze. That is a specific kind of thinking. I stared at him. You were profiling me. I was assessing, he said, with the composure of someone who did not consider these meaningfully different. I opened the car door. Minjae. Yes. Next time you want to assess me, I said pleasantly, you can just ask. I am surprisingly forthcoming when people are direct. I got out and walked to my building without looking back, but I heard faintly through the closed car window the sound of a single quiet exhale that on a different person might have been a laugh. I packed in 20 minutes because I was not a person who agonized over bags. Necessities, work materials, full 2 weeks of clothing, my personal lab notebook from the shelf above my desk, and the small potted plant on my windowsill that I was not leaving behind because I had kept it alive for 2 years, and it deserved better than an empty apartment. I stripped my bed out of habit, left the keys on the counter with a note from my uncle that said, "Found a situation? We'll call soon. Do not panic." Then I stood in the middle of my small, clean apartment with its east-facing window and its refrigerator with nothing on it and its absence of objects with too much history, and I looked at it for one quiet moment. I had been safe here. In a minimal, contained, carefully managed way, I had been safe. What I was walking into was not that kind of safe. It was the other kind, the kind that required other people, which was inherently less controllable and therefore inherently more dangerous for someone like me. I picked up my bag and my plant and left. Minjae was still parked outside. He looked at the plant when I got back in the car and said nothing, which I respected enormously. We were back on the highway before he spoke again. The first site visit could come as early as next week, he said. The reviewer does not announce. He simply arrives. What does he look for? Natural integration, shared routines, evidence of an omega who is present in the space, not just registered to it. He paused. Conversation patterns, comfort with proximity, the small things. I thought about Yoonho's tea ritual. Do-hyun's dish towel, the imperfect shoe line and the jacket on the banister. The small things are the honest things, I said. Yes, Min-jae agreed. So what is the reviewer's name? Oh Chan-woo, he is thorough. A pause. He was the same reviewer for the Min-jun complaint. I turned to look at him. The same one. Yes. And that does not strike the registry as a conflict of interest? It struck us that way, Minji said, with the precise flatness of someone who had exhausted their outrage on this particular point and arrived on the other side at cold practicality. The registry disagreed. I faced forward. Oh, Chan-woo, thorough, previously involved, returning for the follow-up review of the same pack he had flagged in the first place. That was not a coincidence. That was architecture. Min-jae, I said. Yes. Whoever is behind this, the planted informant, the complaint, the voided contracts, they have someone inside the registry. The car was quiet for 3 full seconds. We know, he said. You know, and you are still trying to fight this through the registry's own review process. We are building a parallel case, he said. Evidence gathered outside the registry's jurisdiction. Financial trails, communication records. When we have enough, we take it above the registry to the National PAC Governance Board. How long until you have enough? 2 to 3 weeks, he said, if nothing disrupts the timeline. I thought about unannounced site visits and a reviewer with existing bias and a clock that had been running for 31 days already. A lot can disrupt a timeline in 2 to 3 weeks, I said. Yes, he said simply. That is why we needed someone in the house who could hold the line with the reviewer while we finished building the case. I looked at him. Hold the line. Be present. Be genuine. One be someone Oh Chan-woo cannot easily dismiss or categorize as arranged. He glanced at me briefly. You are not easily categorized. Is that a compliment? It is an observation, he said. But yes. We pulled into the Hyundai building's underground parking and Min-jae cut the engine. In the quiet, I could hear the faint sound of the sea, even down here, like it had followed me from my neighborhood. Min-jae, I said. Yes. If Oh Chan-woo comes and something goes wrong during the visit, I said, I need you to trust that I can read a room and respond to it. I need you to not manage the situation over my head while I am standing in it. He looked at me for a long moment. That will be difficult for me, he said, with an honesty so blunt it almost made me like him immediately. I know, I said. Do it anyway. He held my gaze. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone making a genuine concession rather than an easy one, he nodded. We got out of the car. I carried my bag. He carried my plant without being asked, holding it with the same serious care he applied to everything, and I decided not to comment on it because some moments were better left unacknowledged. The elevator opened on the 4th floor, and the smell of the pack house reached me before the doors were fully parted. Pine resin and warm wood and coffee and something underneath all of it, layered and complex. The combined scent of 5 alphas who had shared space long enough that their individual scents had woven into something singular. My omega biology processed it before I could stop it. Not overwhelmed, something quieter. The animal part of me, the part that operated below language and logic, or taking a long, slow breath and simply noting, known, safe. Here. I told that part of me to calm down significantly. Do-hyun was in the hallway when we stepped out. He looked at the plant in Min-jae's hands and his whole face lit up. You brought a plant. It goes on the windowsill, I said. Do not move it. I would never, he said, with the energy of someone who absolutely would. Do-hyun. It will be on the windowsill, he said. Seo Jiwon appeared from the main room. He looked at my bag, then at me, with an expression that was still recalibrating from the morning's revelations, but was holding steady underneath. Your room is ready, he said. Yunho mentioned it, faces the water, I said. Something shifted in Seo Jiwon's face, brief and unguarded. He glanced down the hall toward where I assumed Yunho was, then back at me. He asked us to change it 2 days ago, he said quietly, before you agreed to anything. I stood in the hallway of a pack house in Hyundai, with my overnight bag and my 2-year-old plant and the accumulated weight of everything I had learned in the last 18 hours. And I thought about an alpha who had asked for my room to face the water before I had decided to come, because he thought I seemed like someone who needed to see something open. Which way is my room, I said, before my face could do anything revealing. Seo Jiwon pointed left. I walked toward it. Behind me, I heard Doyun say quietly to Minjae, "He brought a plant. We are going to be okay." And Minjae, in that flat, precise voice, said, "Do not make assumptions based on the plant." But he said it softly, like he was mostly saying it to himself. And he did not sound entirely convinced. My room was exactly what Yunho had said it would be. A window that faced the water, wide and clean, the sea sitting beyond it in the full morning light like something that had been placed there deliberately. I stood in front of it for a moment with my bag still on my shoulder and just looked, because sometimes a thing delivers exactly what it promised, and you need a second to register that. The room itself was simple. A bed with gray linen, a desk along the left wall, a wardrobe, a small bookshelf that was empty in the particular way of something that had been cleared recently rather than never used. Someone had put a glass of water on the desk. Just a glass of water, nothing performative about it. The kind of small thing that happened when someone thought about what another person might need without being asked. I put my bag down. I put my plant on the windowsill where it belonged. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the sea and gave myself exactly 2 minutes to feel the full weight of what I had just done before I put it away and got functional. 2 minutes passed. I unpacked. By the time I emerged from my room, the pack house had shifted into a different register of activity. The quiet breakfast morning had given way to something more textured. I could hear Seo Jiwon on a call in the main room, his voice low and controlled, the particular cadence of someone discussing something serious in professional language. From the kitchen, it's the sounds of Do-Yun doing something that involved more dishes than seemed strictly necessary. Somewhere further back in the apartment, music, quiet and unhurried, the kind of instrumental track that existed as atmosphere rather than entertainment. I followed the music. It led me to a room at the far end of the hall that turned out to be a secondary sitting room, smaller than the main one, with a low couch and a coffee table covered in papers, and two laptops open at angles that suggested they had been there for a while. Yunho was on the couch with his knees pulled up, a tablet in his lap, reading something with the focused stillness of someone completely absorbed. He had changed into a dark green sweater that made him look slightly less like he had not slept, and slightly more like a person who had chosen to be awake. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "Settled?" "Mostly," I said. "The plan is on the windowsill." Something in his face softened. Not a smile exactly, more the precursor to one, the arrangement of features that happened just before. "Good." I looked at the papers on the coffee table. Not to be nosy, but because I was constitutionally incapable of being in a room with documents and not registering their general nature. Financial records from the look of it. Column structures, figures, dates. I pulled my gaze away. "You can look," Yunho said. "It is not sensitive." "Well," he paused. "It is sensitive, but you already know the shape of the situation, so the details do not change anything." I sat down in the chair across from him. "The parallel case Minji mentioned." "Yes." He set the tablet down on his knee. "Dr. We have been building it for 5 months. Transaction records showing that the investment group Minjun was feeding information to make 3 significant acquisitions in the weeks following the complaint filing. Acquisitions that were only possible because they had advanced knowledge of our contract positions." "That is insider trading," I said. "Arguably," he said. "The legal threshold is specific, and our documents are not quite there yet. We need one more connection, a direct communication record between someone inside the registry and the investment group, to close the chain. And you do not have that yet." "We have a partial record," he said, "a series of encrypted messages between an unidentified registry employee and a private address associated with the investment group's secondary holding company." He looked at his tablet. "The encryption is the problem. We have not been able to break it within the legal framework we are operating in." I looked at the papers on the table, at the columns and figures and dates representing 5 months of careful, patient evidence building by people who had every reason to be angry and had chosen to be methodical instead. "What is the encryption protocol?" Yunho looked at me. "Why?" "Because I have a biochemistry degree, which required 2 years of computational modeling coursework, which required fluency in data encryption frameworks, I said, and I am currently unemployed and looking for something to do in the home office. Yunho stared at me for a long moment. His quiet eyes had gone very attentive. You can break encrypted communications. I can analyze the structural framework and identify vulnerabilities that a legal decryption specialist could then use to access the content without compromising admissibility, I said, which is a more precise way of saying yes. He kept staring. Yunho, I said, yes. Is there a reason you look like I just told you the furniture can talk? He blinked. Then he said with the careful sincerity of someone who did not deploy words carelessly, we have been looking for that specific capability for 3 months. Every specialist we contacted either could not do it within legal parameters or wanted compensation that would have raised questions we could not afford. He paused. And you walked in this morning because of eggs. The eggs were genuinely good, I said. His face did the thing again. The precursor. And this time it went all the way, a small, real, unhurried smile that rearranged his face entirely and made him look like someone 10 years younger and considerably less exhausted. I looked away from it because it was the kind of smile that required recovery time and I was not prepared. I will tell Minjae, Yunho said, already reaching for his phone. Tell Seo Jiwon first, I said. He is the one who needs to agree to it, and frame it as a practical arrangement, not a rescue. I do not want anyone feeling like they owe me something before we have established any kind of actual dynamic here. Yunho looked at me over his phone. You think about relational structure carefully? I think about consequences carefully, I said. Relational structure is just applied consequence management. He considered that. And then he nodded and typed something on his phone, presumably to Seo Jiwon, and set it back down. Can I ask you something, he said. You can try, I said. The glove, he said. Simply, without the edge of intrusiveness that the question could have carried from someone else. It is not a nerve condition. I looked at him. He looked back. His expression was not pushing, not probing, just open. The specific openness of someone who had decided to ask directly rather than wonder sideways. No, I said. It is not. He nodded slowly. He did not ask the follow-up. He just held the answer I had given him, which was not a full answer, and treated it like it was enough for now. That was, I realized, a very particular kind of respect. The kind that was harder to practice than most people understood. Thank you, I said. He looked slightly confused. And for what? For not asking the next question. He was quiet for a moment. Then softly, everyone deserves at least one thing that is theirs alone. I pressed my right hand against my thigh and said nothing. The sea moved outside the window at the end of the hall, and the music played its quiet, unhurried track. And Yunho went back to his tablet, and I sat in that small room with its scattered evidence and its 2 open laptops, and felt the shape of the 30 days ahead of me begin to take on weight and texture, and something that was not quite dread and not quite anticipation, but lived in the territory between them. Seo Jiwon appeared in the doorway 11 minutes later. He had finished his call. His collar was still open. His expression had settled back into its deep water stillness. But there was something different in the set of his shoulders than there had been this morning. Slightly less contained, like something had been put down that had been carried for a while. He looked at me. Yunho told me what you offered. It is not an offer, I said. It is a practical arrangement with clear parameters. I analyze the encryption framework and document my methodology in a way that is legally clean. You take the documentation to your specialist and they execute the access. My name stays out of the formal record. Why does your name stay out? He asked. Because I am currently in a probationary bond arrangement with a PAC under registry review, I said, and having the PAC's Omega directly involved in building their legal case would give Oh Chanwoo grounds to question the integrity of the evidence. I held his gaze. I am useful to you clean, not tangled in the chain of custody. Seo Jiwon looked at me for a long, steady moment. How long have you been thinking about this? Since the highway, I said. He was quiet. Then he crossed the room and sat on the other end of the couch from Yunho, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at the papers on the table, at 5 months of careful evidence that needed one more connection. You came here this morning because of eggs, he said. Do-hyun is a good cook, I said. Do not read too much into it. Seo looked up at me, and for the first time since the Haenyeo Grand Hall, since the deep water eyes and the quiet certain voice saying him, since the consultation room and the terms and the things that were not quite nothing. Quan Seojin looked at me without any of the calculation or the careful management or the weight of 31 days already elapsed on a clock someone else had started. He just looked at me. Why are you doing this? He asked. Not the pack arrangement, not the encryption. The question was bigger than both of those and we both knew it. I thought about my east-facing window and my empty refrigerator and my carefully managed apartment with no objects that carried too much history. I thought about 4 years of keeping my right hand covered and my distances maintained and my connections shallow enough that nothing could flood in uninvited. I thought about Yunho asking them to put me in the room that faced the water before I had decided to come. Because someone built a clock to make you fail, I said. Han and I find that genuinely irritating. Seojin held my gaze. Also, I said, the shoes by your front door. Someone organized them and someone else disrupted the organization and nobody resolved it. That specific dynamic told me more about this pack in 10 seconds than the entire consultation did. You are real people with a real problem and a real deadline. I paused. I can help with the problem. The deadline is already shared. The room was quiet. Yunho had stopped pretending to read his tablet. Seojin said, Jiwon. It was the first time he had used my name without my family name attached. Just Jiwon, the way people said it when the formality had run its course, and something underneath it had taken over without anyone deciding to let it. Yes, I said. Thank you, he said. I looked at him for a moment. At the open collar and the deep water eyes, and the relief he was not trying to hide anymore. Then I looked at Yunho, and his small, real smile and his tablet, and his 5 months of careful, patient work. Do not thank me yet, I said. I have not seen the encryption protocol. It might be terrible. And if it is, Seojin asked, then I will be irritated about that too, I said, and I will fix it anyway. From the kitchen, Do-hyun's voice carried down the hall with the particular caring power of a person who was not trying to eavesdrop, but absolutely was. I told you the eggs would work, he said, to no one in particular and everyone simultaneously. Minja's voice followed, flat and immediate. We are not crediting the eggs. The eggs deserve credit. Do-hyun. I put my face in my hand. Yunho made a sound beside me that was quiet and warm and completely unguarded. It was, I realized, the first time I had heard him laugh. It sounded like something that had been waiting a long time to come out. I stayed in that small sitting room for another hour, going through the encryption documentation Yunho pulled up on one of the open laptops, getting familiar with the framework, mapping the structural logic of it in my head the way I used to map molecular chains in the lab. Patient work, the kind that required full attention and rewarded it. I found 2 potential vulnerability points in the first 40 minutes and noted them in my own notebook in handwriting that only I could fully read, which was intentional. Minji came in at some point and sat in the chair I had vacated, Aga going through his own documents with his own focused quiet. He did not comment on my methodology. He did not hover. He simply occupied the same space with the same serious attention he applied to everything. And after a while, it stopped feeling like being observed and started feeling like being alongside, which was different in a way I did not have precise language for yet. Junho appeared in the doorway around midday. He stood there for a moment, looking at the 3 of us distributed around the room, and something moved across his face that he did not try to manage into neutrality. It lasted only a second. Then he said, Do-hyun says lunch is ready, and disappeared back down the hall. We ate at the kitchen table, all 6 of us, for the first time. Do-hyun had made doenjang jjigae and rice, simple and warm, and he served it with the casual efficiency of someone who fed people as a primary love language, and had fully accepted this about himself. Seojin sat at the head of the table. I sat between Yunho and the empty chair that Junho took last, settling into it with his careful posture and his eyes that were, meal by meal, incrementally less guarded than they had been at the auction. The conversation was not dramatic. That was the thing I kept noting. It was ordinary. Do-hyun complained about the building's elevator speed. Min-jae corrected something Do-hyun said about elevator mechanics with the focused precision of someone who could not allow inaccuracies to stand unchallenged. Seo Jiwon listened to both of them with the expression of a man who had been having this exact category of exchange for years and found it, underneath the surface, but deeply settling. Yoonho ate quietly and occasionally said one thing that reframed the entire conversation and then went back to eating as if he had not done it. Junho said little, but he passed me the kimchi before I reached for it, which meant he had been paying attention to my plate, and that small thing sat in my chest in a way I was not ready to examine. I washed my own bowl after lunch. Min-jae washed his alongside mine without comment. We stood at the sink in silence, and it was the comfortable kind, the kind that had developed faster than made logical sense, and that I was choosing not to interrogate because some things were better accepted than explained. The afternoon moved in layers. I worked in the home office, a proper room with a proper desk and good light, and made significant progress on the encryption vulnerability analysis. Nishojin stopped in once, stood behind me for a moment looking at the screen, said nothing, and left. The saying nothing was its own kind of communication, and I was starting to understand his specific dialect of it. At some point, Do-hyun brought me coffee without being asked. He set it on the desk, looked at my notebook, said, "Is that actually legible to you?" I said yes, he said, "Remarkable," and left. By late afternoon, I had what I needed: a clean, documented analysis of two structural vulnerabilities in the encryption framework, written in language precise enough to be legally useful and clear enough that a specialist could action it within 48 hours. I printed it, put it in a plain folder, and brought it to Seo Jiwon in the main room. He read it standing up, in which I had already identified as something he did when the contents required his full seriousness. 3 pages. He read all of it. Then he closed the folder and looked at me. "This is enough," he said. "It should be more than enough," I said. "The second vulnerability is the stronger one. That is where they will get the access they need." He held the folder. "Jiwon, do not thank me again," I said. "Call your specialist tonight. The sooner this moves, the better, given the site visit timeline." He looked at me for a moment longer than the words required. Then he nodded and took out his phone. I went back to the home office to close up my laptop, and that was when I heard it. Voices. From the hallway outside the office door. Low and terse, in the specific register of an argument being conducted at reduced volume by people who were aware of being overheard, but had reached the point where continuing was more urgent than discretion. Yoonho's voice, and one I did not recognize. I went still. The unfamiliar voice was smooth and measured, the kind of smooth that came from practice rather than nature. "You understand what happens if the review does not go in your favor," it said. "The contract's void. The pack loses standing. Everything you have built." "I understand," Junho said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of someone who had been in this conversation before, or one exactly like it. "Then you understand that the simplest resolution is still available to you," the other voice said. "Remove the obstacle. The Omega is new, untested. Only one conversation with the right person and his credibility with the reviewer becomes a question mark." My hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "No," Junho said. "Junho." I said no. Something in his voice had shifted. The flatness was still there, but underneath it something had caught, like an ember that had been banked for a long time finding air. "Whatever you think you have over me, whatever leverage you have been sitting on since 8 months ago, use it or do not, but I will not touch him." Silence. Then the smooth voice, quieter now and colder. "You were always the weak point in this pack. Sentimental. It will cost you." A door opened somewhere. Footsteps, receding, then nothing. I sat in the home office with my hand on the edge of the desk and my heart doing something loud and unsteady in my chest and my right hand. My gloved right hand pressed so hard against my thigh that I could feel my own pulse in my palm through the fabric. Someone had been in this apartment. Someone connected to the people who had planted Minjin, who had filed the complaint, who had built a clock to make this pack fail, and they had come here, today, and they had asked Junho to destroy my credibility before the review. And Junho had said no. I stood up, slowly, The folder with the encryption analysis was still on Seo Jin's desk in the main room. The specialist call had not been made yet. The vulnerabilities I had documented, if someone knew they existed, could be locked off before the specialist ever reached them. The timeline had just compressed. Not weeks, not days. Tonight. I walked to the office door and opened it. The hallway was empty. The apartment had the specific quality of a space that did not yet know what had just happened inside it. From the main room, Seo Jin's voice on his call, low and professional, unaware. From the kitchen, Do-hyun moving around, the sound of the kettle. From the far sitting room, the quiet of Yoon-ho and his tablet. And from the end of the hall, Joon-ho's door, closed. I walked to it, stood in front of it, raised my hand and knocked twice, the same way I knocked on anything, solid and clear, because hesitant knocking was just prolonged uncertainty, and I had passed my threshold for uncertainty approximately 40 minutes ago. The door opened. Joon-ho stood in the gap looking at me with his careful, composed face, except it was not fully composed right now. There was something at the edges of it, around the eyes and the jaw, or that had not been fully put back after the conversation in the hallway. Something exposed, something tired in the specific way of a person who has been holding a line alone for a very long time. He looked at me and knew immediately from my face that I had heard. Jiwon, he said. My name, just my name, with a weight in it that I did not have a full translation for yet. I know, I said. We need to move the timeline. Tonight, not tomorrow. The specialist needs to be called in the next hour. I held his gaze. And then you are going to tell me who was just in this apartment. He looked at me for a long moment. The exposed thing at the edges of his face did not go away. If anything, it deepened, became more present, like something that had been behind glass and the glass had developed a crack. If I tell you, he said quietly, Hannah, it changes everything you think you know about why we chose you last night. My heart did something that was not a stutter and not a stop, but lived precisely between them. Tell me anyway, I said. Joon-ho took a slow breath, and then he said a name, and the floor of everything I had built in the last 18 hours shifted beneath me like the ground before an earthquake. The moment of impossible stillness right before the world decides to break. Because the name he said was my uncle's. But Thursday was 2 days away, and I had just touched Quan Seo Jin's hand for the first time, which meant I had just touched the first of 5. Somewhere in this pack house, 4 other alphas were waking up completely unaware that the rules had just changed. I looked at my ungloved hand. Then I smiled, slow and private, into my tea. 4 more Thursdays coming. I could be patient. If you stayed until this moment, thank you. That means everything. Drop your favorite character in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to be here when Jiwon takes that glove off for the second time, the third, the fourth, and the fifth, subscribe and hit the bell.